repeat, but we can always come back. So I just want to say hello to everyone that's able to join today, and just say that it's that we're, just to contextualize, that we're, in case it wasn't evident from the announcement of the fall semester Food for Thoughts, that we're in different ways integrating addressing systemic racism into this semester of Food for Thought, and then we'll do an evaluation sort of mid-semester and make some decisions about what to do next semester. I'm not sure if all of you were able to join last Food for Thought. I realized when I was, we've sort of scrunched a few of them into about a 6-week period that had to do with scheduling. But a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Zinzi Bailey was our kickoff speaker for Food for Thought. She gave, I thought, a really comprehensive and thoughtful and hopefully energizing presentation on both how do we approach and advance social science research and activism related to structural racism, pushed us a little bit, I think in a good way, very good way, to reflect on how Black Lives Matter in our institution and of course throughout our country and worldwide. And really thinking about how do we use science and use our advocacy and service and education to make change. So hopefully we did record that. I think Yasmin's working on editing that, and we'll be able to make it available, right, Yasmin?
Yes.
I think, yeah. So so if you weren't able to see it, and hopefully we can put it out on our website and everything, I think it was a good beginning. So just to acknowledge that, and to say that the plan, today is to move into just sort of summarize what work we've done, what we're beginning to do, and start a discussion of where we want to go forward and how to do that collectively in terms of addressing systemic racism, particularly within SMS. Of course, we don't operate in a vacuum. And so some of the steps I hope we take and are taking and decide to take end up being something that we're doing across departments or collaboratively at the school, at the university, and of course in our own communities. Our own communities, meaning our local one, as well as wherever our communities may end up being, whether they're physical communities or emotional or identity communities. So I wanted to say that's really the purpose of today. What I'm going to do in a moment is go to a bit of a presentation that's based, let me just lay out what I hope we'll do, and then we'll jump in. I'll go to a relatively brief presentation that reflects basically what I've put together with a lot of input from others, whom I'll acknowledge in a moment, that sort of guides us as a blueprint or a draft document for our diversity and inclusion committee, as well as guiding that committee, but that will be the focus for today. Sorry, Kwame, you threw me off with the Lakers jersey in the back. All of a sudden, I thought we were being joined by a Laker, so sorry. So
no, I'm sorry, I'm just paying tribute to Kobe, that's all.
That's okay, I lost my train of thought for a minute. I thought I was in the bubble, so sorry, it's okay. Anyway, nice to see you. So that's what we'll do today. I'm gonna go to the slides and just, Merlin's with you, KB24 forever. So we can't quite make this a sports event, but we appreciate the enthusiasm. And we'll carry that over to all of our efforts and make our own impact in the way hopefully the NBA and other norm changers and behavior changers are. So I think what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go to the slide presentation, which I think should only take about 5 minutes. To give you a little background on what we've put together for a document and how I hope it guides where we go. It's as I said, a blueprint and a draft, and it's just really to get our conversation and our action plan going. I will say that some of the areas for action steps, I'll just give you a sort of a heads up, are sort of in what I consider 6 domains that kind of came together in 6 domains. And so what I'm hoping, if we can pull all this off, is that we'll go into breakout rooms twice to have like a discussion about a few of those domains, come back together and talk, and then do the last few domains. Definitely leaving time to come back together to look overall and think about steps forward, plan step forwards, not just think about them. Let me think if there's anything else. I haven't, we haven't created the breakout rooms yet, so there may be a little point where that takes a moment after. We didn't do that because I wanted to get a sense of how many people would be here to make that most effective, but that will happen in a moment. So let me just, let me go to sharing my screen. Let's see. I'm going to see, I realized once I share my screen and have the PowerPoints, it's much harder for me to see more of your faces, which is hard for me. Actually, can you guys see that?
No,
Not yet.
not yet.
Okay, give me a second. We had it before, right?
Yes,
Yasmin?
you did.
Because all of a sudden I can't see you either. 1 second. This happened yesterday. Can you see it yet?
Nope.
No,
I didn't know what this phrase meant before recently, but are you still the host?
she's still the host.
Yes. And tell me why that might be the case. How far I lost my host ability?
I think you have to be the host in order to share your screen.
Yeah,
Or the co-host, but she's the host.
I am a host because I have the breakout rooms. Well, this is a bummer. It just worked 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, you just showed us your slides, Kathy.
Yeah, I know. Thanks, Kavita. We tried this. 1 second, everybody. Why wouldn't that be working? Let me try. I'll start it over.
Go.
Now it's working? Okay.
Well, we could see your drive, but the PowerPoint's not up yet. So you have to launch your PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. It's interesting. How about now?
Not yet. I think you need to double click and launch the FFT races.
Open, Kathy?
Well, it was open, and that's why I thought maybe it
So now
wasn't.
you have to share the PowerPoint. So right now you're sharing your desktop screen and you need to share the
Okay.
PowerPoint.
So I would unshare your screen and then put the little box on the PowerPoint and then share it again.
Yeah, you have to, like Marnie said, you have to, like, there'll be a bunch of windows and you have to pick the PowerPoint.
There you
Oh,
go.
okay. Now you can share it and then you can go to full screen once it's, there you go.
It's just late.
I think it is just delayed because
Oh, okay.
it's okay. It's just not actually doing it.
Maybe try the little icon down at the bottom.
So can you see it, but not in presentation format?
Yeah.
Right, but correct. You can hit this button.
The one down at the bottom. The little, there you are.
There you go. Next,
Next
one more. No,
The
keep
other
going.
direction. No.
No.
I always
There.
use the,
Got
it's
it.
interesting. I use the click from the top. I never use the icons. It wasn't taking it, I think. Isn't that strange? Anyway, it took it before. Sorry, everybody. I was actually trying to watch a really interesting conversation put on by the New Yorker last night, and they couldn't communicate with each other. So it happens to everyone. All right, let's give it a try. So I just want to give you an overview. We'll talk much more about this in breakout groups. And this is set up as, let me just go back one. Okay. So, so as I said, what we've put together in order to, let me read the first sentence, which I know you all can read, but we must not only address racism, but make specific commitments and plans to implement change in SMS specifically, and at the school and the university level. While the mission of SMS, and we're at the heart of it, is at the heart of addressing systemic racism, we also need to acknowledge our limitations and our failures and learn from our contributions and effort from the past and what we put forward in the present, so that we can actually make, and this obviously reflects what we believe in all that we do, to make sustainable, concrete changes going forward by leveraging our departmental knowledge and expertise. And we'll spell check concrete next time. So let me just say, just to sort of take us back over the last few months, this document got put together, and we're really, sort of doing it now in the beginning of the semester so that students would be back and we would be focused into this context and time of the beginning of the semester, even though we've been working to address this over the summer and get some infrastructure in place. I'm going to say that these are some initial ideas that we have that have been based on the town halls that we had, small group and individual meetings that were with students and faculty and staff, and an SMS student survey. So when I talk about sort of where these domains have come together and where we might direct our effort, they're not in any particular order. We just tried to put them together based on themes that were coming through across all of that. This document has been reviewed and had input from deputy chairs, from the dean's office, from faculty, from administrative representatives, and our own students, with special thanks to Daniel Olahan and G. Thorpe, who did really extensive gathering of information and very specific suggestions to me and to us. And when we get back to that, we're looking at it as a guide if we decide to do that. We can look also at the detailed input from various people. So let me say I think all of you know that we've put together a diversity and inclusion committee for SMS. I hope all of you know, because everyone was asked to make nominations for students. So the student nominations, which were many, came from peers, came from self-nominations, from faculty nominations, and we also have had that same mechanism for staff. So I want to say it was quite a challenge to make decisions about whom would be representatives of students and staff, but we're happy with, we hope everyone will be happy with trying to do the balance of various perspectives. And just to remind everyone that this functions as like a steering committee, not a decision-making body. And so as we move forward, we'll be clear on how we communicate and sort of which things go, how we go in what way. I was hoping, I think I'll just go through this, and when we're all back on the screen, I just want to shout out to each of the people on the committee, but you can see there are 5 faculty members, Drs. Kohal, Hernandez, Siva Ramakrishnan, Summer, and Wingood, with of course, Dr. Diakoy and Fulilov available as needed, always giving us their contributions. We decided on 4 master's students, 2 from second year, 2 from first year, Lauren Battle, Tiaja Hunter, Eugene Massey, Kwame Simpson, and 1 doctoral student, Desiree Abudin. And then staff members, Mayella and Nydia. I'm hoping that you're here as well, Rana and Rodriguez. So I want people to, in case they don't know those faces and those people, I want to be able to give a note, be able to put a name with the face when we get back onto the full screen. So as I was saying, that the themes really fell into what I put as 6 areas. I'll say them quickly so you have the context, but things specifically related to the department, like at a departmental level, specific to education and coursework, and I'll have a slide on each of these in a minute. Education and coursework, students specifically, faculty, I guess it's more than 6, and then research staff and community engagement, as well as, very importantly, a system to monitor this progress. And I didn't list we came up like with 13 ways that we may be working with the school, like at the school level, not specific to SMS only, which I'm happy to share with you. So these are really just to give you a sense of some of the topics and themes and ideas that came up from the departmental level. What we have done, which is to establish a committee with input that will be a leadership group that we think our plan is to go with 1 committee at this point. There may be sub activities. Obviously, decisions we make will involve others in the or suggestions made by the committee, those may lead to decisions that obviously involve people outside the committee. And because of the amount of interest from students, I do just want to say that for both topics related to racism as well as other issues for students, that at the great recommendation of Marita, I'm going to establish something we think we'll call the chairs circle, so that students can on a regular basis be able to talk to me directly and give me input about any number of things. So that we'll have a couple of groupings in that way for input. That we should implement training related to bias, implicit bias, microaggressions, etc. That I believe is will move forward something led at the school level. We certainly want to engage actively with Forward and the Black and Latinx Student Caucus. And then something that's another type of infrastructure, which is as a department sort of think about ways that and develop ways and collaborations where we can actually submit and get funding through diversity supplements funded by NIH or other mechanisms that could address social determinants and racism and other syndemics, and including T32 training programs, which Gina Wingood actually has already submitted a training grant on that. So some of these ideas you'll see we were brainstorming earlier in the summer. We've been getting started on some of them. But again, these are some ideas. The other, within the context of education and coursework, we've, at the suggestion really of students and faculty agree that we should be reviewing our syllabi to be sure that we're reflecting a wide range of perspectives. I think we may do this coming out of Regine's office in terms of having guidance for that, and this may be reflected at the faculty level as well as at possibly the curriculum committee. We had this idea to integrate structural racism into the core, which has already happened and has been part of that coursework, and establishing racism and health as the focus for food for thought. So these were some of the early summer ideas that we were able to get going, or that we'd been thinking about in the spring. So I wanted to give these as examples. Of course, we can do more. As I said, we want to be able to engage the students, first and second year students, through advisory groups, through an establishment of a circle, quote unquote, to meet regularly with me, and other leadership as needed. One idea that was certainly suggested by many is to look at how we what kind of system we have for support for students and advising that could address any barriers to retention and support for students, and to be increasing and this will come back to this in other strategies, but how to increase the proportion of our student body who are, your pictures, maybe I can change this. I just realized your pictures are covering up parts of my words, but I think I know what's on the slide. I hope you can see most of them. So to be able to increase our student body, and we'll say this for faculty as well, that's probably the next slide, in terms of overall increasement of both student and faculty recruitment and mentoring support, and retention of both Black and Latinx students and faculty. One idea I think is an interesting one is how when we talk about our progress, either as a department or individual faculty, how we really could specifically integrate how we're addressing these structural inequalities in coursework in our research, and this would be the type of thing I would talk about with faculty on an individual basis, as well as how we're doing through our centers, through our department overall, and potentially provide additional grant review and infrastructure, and for both internal and external grants that address racism. There were some pots of money put out by the university this summer that we would want to be watching for funding to be able to address this. And we hope that those kinds of resources continue to come. I think I put these three on one slide. It doesn't mean they're not, there aren't more potential bullets, but I wanted to grab some representative ones. I think the student said this to me first, and I think it was reflected in what Dr. Bailey was talking about, which is how can SMS, we can be the leaders in addressing systemic racism scholarship. How do we advance our science? How we have so many faculty that are addressing these issues in different ways. How do we further profile what they do, expand what others do, and hopefully really grow our expertise in this area. And from the staff perspective, we want to be able to continue to increase our hiring and professional development of Black and Latinx staff. And then a very big sweep here is how do we do more community engagement? I think we have some exemplars, of course, and many of, I think, the Mailman exemplars in community collaborative research are in our department. And how do we do more of that, use that as examples in terms of, and then we have the fantastic effort of Cypher, which actually will be our December food for thought, being able to represent what students have been doing in community engagement specific to racism or other areas of health disparities. So and then lastly, importantly, is the what kind of system do we use to monitor our progress? I think we'll want to land on certain monitoring mechanisms like enrollment and retention. Are we able to develop new courses, maybe have some joint courses with other departments? I know there was recently a certificate event on data science and racism. We want to do more of those types of things. So be able to look at what we're offering from the educational perspective, faculty recruitment, retention, and promotion, staff positions, and being sure that these policies are documented and that we really can advocate for training for all and advancement really for all. So what I would wrap up this with is that this is a slide that I often use when I talk about SMS, which is that and then talk in much more detail about each component. But just as a reminder, this I think represents what we're about, which is scholarship, education, service, and advocacy. So I'm thinking, when I think about those areas for focus, it seems to me that this is hopefully these four pillars of what we do are represented in where we are, where we're hoping to go to advance. So I'm going to stop there, and hopefully that gave a bit of an overview for. Oops, sorry, I'm just going to close this now. 1 second. It's problematic when you read the chats while you're talking and looking. So sorry if I got distracted for a moment. All right, so let me just say, I think we can certainly take a few minutes for questions or reactions or thoughts before we go into some breakout groups to be able to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the potential ways forward. Actually, and what I also, I just want to, would it be helpful, or do people feel like they know everyone on the diversity committee? It'd be great if, I'm just trying to look if everyone is here. If you could either give a hands up or just say hello. I'm happy to go through who's on the list, unless you just want to jump out there. Is Alcohol here? Sorry, this is the tough part about not seeing everybody. I don't think Al could make it today. Let's see, sorry. Diana Hernandez, you out there somewhere? No, I thought I saw you. Okay. Kavita, I know you're there. People seeing away from Kavita, probably not. And Marnie, I saw is here, and Gina is here. So thank you to the faculty. Is Lauren here? Let me quickly look through the students.
Bob and I are here as well.
Oh, sorry, Ray. One step ahead, sorry. Bob is waving. Hello, Ray, thank you, sorry. I skipped ahead to the next slot, sorry. We appreciate everything that you do. I'd love to be able to say you're a regular on the committee, but we know how much you are doing always overall. So we we appreciate having you to go to for input and welcome your involvement whenever you can be available. Is Tiaja here? I think I didn't see Lauren. I saw Eugene, just trying to go through. Where are you, Eugene? Give a wave. Okay. Say
Hi.
hello. Hello. And Kwame, Lakers are here.
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Mayella, I know I saw here. Thanks, Mayella. And is Nydia here somewhere?
No.
Not today. Okay. Okay. Any questions on the sort of how we came to this sort of guiding? I use the word document, but the important point is like it's some concepts as a blueprint to think about how to go forward. So let me just ask a process question. I think knowing the areas, I was going to break into groups twice, but sometimes then that cuts off conversation at the wrong point. I'm wondering if we just break into groups once for say 20, 25 minutes and each group can decide which area, any of the areas they'd like to talk about, or would you prefer to break out twice? Any preference based on knowing some of the topics?
As far as timing, I think once would be better.
Good. Okay, I agree with you, Yasmin. Okay, so let me just, and again, we don't have to discuss them specific to those areas. I know you don't have the PowerPoints in front of you at this point, but I think just generally thinking about departmental level types of action steps, education and coursework and student concerns sort of tie together in some ways. Faculty and research and staff, I think, tie together, as well as community engagement overall. So what I will do once I put you into the breakout groups is just trust you to decide who might be the person that reports back and hope that the breakout rooms reflect some sort of randomness. I think I'm going to put you into doing a quick multiplication here. How do you feel about 6, 7 people in your groups? Is that a good size for? Okay. All right. So, okay. You should, what we say, maybe 20 minutes or so. Sorry, Yasmin?
That's sufficient.
Yeah, okay. And then if I can set this up correctly, we'll give you a heads up when it's about finished, but we'll ask for, report backs, and then we'll brief report backs on what might be priority action steps is the way I would think about it. Sorry, I'm doing breakout groups at the same time. Andrea, should I have the time before or after opening all rooms?
Which time is that, Kathy?
When I get to tell it how long to go.
Oh, so you can set it to close automatically at 20, and then you can give the 60-second, I think the default is 60-second warning, and just now open up. Yep, there it goes.
Okay, to doing.
Rather not
I see her.
Hi, I do. I'm trying to turn it on. I'm having some issues, but I can still talk.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So we have 20 minutes, is that
20 minutes.
okay?
So you're the chair. And Kavita will bring it back.
I think,
we'll report back, okay.
yes. No,
Wait, Jasmine, why aren't you the chair?
No.
yeah, I think someone else should report back. I don't have a pen and paper, wait.
It's okay. I think you do great with speaking, so I think it'll be better.
I think you can find a pen and paper in that office, or just type on your computer.
Okay, well, 1 second. I'll be back in a minute.
Yes.
You guys go ahead.
So do people have thoughts on priority actions? I mean, I think we've all seen the document and the committee has not yet met, but I sort of don't want to be the one talking. I feel like it's about what other people think perhaps are the priorities. I think they're all important. So
I'm kind of much more interested in what other folk are going to do, because I think all of us in this particular Zoom room are already very heavily identified with what we want the department to do. So,
Right.
you know, this is a substantial portion of the folk who are on the committee, right? Me, Marnie, Rita.
Yeah,
you know,
Rita. Yeah.
and you know, Yasmin, you know, is the person who makes all this happen. So it's not as if, you know, she's a student who's, you know, anxious to figure out what she's going to do with her life when she graduates from Mailman.
Right.
Yeah, this is I guess the problem with randomization. You know, at least for me, maybe the most important thing is that I've been here long enough to recall all the different iterations that the school has gone through trying to address these issues.
Yeah.
And they always have, at the very beginning, a huge head of steam, a lot of enthusiasm. Then they sort of fall apart when everything goes to a committee, and 2, maybe 3 years later, you have a report back and people say, oh, you guys still here? What are you doing? And it has always been that we've made great recommendations, but we've never had the resources to back them up. So if we say we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and welcome to the United States, nothing here is free. If you don't have something in the way of cash or some other tangible resource that you can fall upon, good ideas are just that. They're good ideas. They never find their way into something that looks like the real world. So conversations without some notion about how we're going to get the oomph to put them into action, it seems to me, it ought to be one of the main priorities. If we're not clear that recommendations we make are likely to be acted upon, I mean, at some levels, this is just a waste of time.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me just, I think the first point we want to make is that recommendations and resources go together, and one without the other doesn't make sense for us, right?
Well put.
So we need to have a grip on that to start.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would just add, I wonder in relation to that, so one, there are resources at the school level, the university level, and the department level, and how people are envisioning that playing out, because some things I think that are being recommended, probably the department cannot pay for realistically. And will the school or the university plan to pick that up, or sort of what that will look like? And then the other thing, and this is not to create work for anybody, but I actually was going to ask you, Bob, like, how many times have you done this? And if there are 20 years of good sets of recommendations every 5 years, you know, would it behoove us, maybe the times have changed so much that that's not useful, or would it behoove us to dig those up from whatever file they're in at dean level or department level, you know, and say, here are the ones that have come up over the last 20 years. Look at the patterns, or we keep coming back to the same thing, or maybe that's not worth it because we're in a new era and there's new energy maybe that will last and new issues, and it's not worth that. But
if
I don't know, I hate to say, let's all talk about it for 6 months when they're lying and sitting in a file somewhere.
Yeah.
So
but it's worth knowing why some things have failed before us, right? I mean, I think even if the times are different, I don't know if each time the ideas are that new. I mean, in terms
It's
of
more
social,
upfront now. It's more in your face now.
yeah. So the,
So
the social
that's why.
justice issue-
But
the
but
issues of sorry.
yeah, but
Yasmin.
honestly, if you think about it, you have to start with self first. Because if your inner self recognize racism, that racism exists, then if you recognize that 20 years ago, then automatically some of these things like the course syllabus and other things would have automatically happened. It would just happen because people understood and accepted it. It seems now, because of what's happening out there, there's a possible chance that things will happen. So you say those files 20 years ago, I had the files from 20 years ago when the diversity committee existed. I have that, but it's different people, different energy, something else comes along. I mean, even looking at the grand rounds first, it was directed to gun violence, and then something happens in the world, so then it's directed to this. So, I mean, yes, we keep talking and directing, but there's no action.
Right.
Oh,
So you feel there's a different kind of accountability now that they may be there, right? Maybe an action.
Maybe.
Yeah.
can I just jump in there? Because I want to back up right with what Yasmin said. So the theme for my social determinants course this year is reports as surrogates for action. And this because I hung out with Bob all summer long virtually, and was reminded not only of the long history of recommendations, but the iterative nature of those recommendations from the 30s on. I mean, it's incredible. And we have these blistering reports. It's just like the reports on health inequality, but in a different area. So I think it's not simply enough to say this is another wake-up call, because the clock has a snooze button on it. It's just incredible how often, right after the report and all this activity and hectic sort of response, it dies again and again and again. So I think, and I don't think we are in a position to tell the university or the department where to get the resources from. I certainly couldn't do that, but that's certainly something that the diversity committee could ask for some consultation on. Bob and I have been repeatedly stymied by the suggestion that they can't offer fellowships or scholarships without money in hand. But the one thing the university is good for as an in-kind offer is a slot in the classroom. So I mean, I think that the action and report linkage is absolutely essential, and that should be what's monitored.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I hope Kavita is writing that. I guess my only thought is it worth, and I totally hear you, Yasmin, and I agree. I'm glad you said that. Is it worth saying, rather than spending a lot of time coming up with more recommendations that have been come up with 6 times before over the last 20 years, saying, look, these have come up over the last 20 years 6 times. Let's not spend 6 months or a year coming up with the same recommendations. Let's say let's review them. These are the same things that need to change, that have needed to change for 20 years. So let's spend the 6 months figuring out the advocacy or the push or the monitoring that they actually do happen, or how they can happen, rather than what should they be. And maybe we don't need to do that. I mean, maybe we're already there, but I just think if lots of intellectual, energy has already gone into doing that. And then also maybe, Yasmin, separating out, these things will be addressed by self-awareness, and that should be a big push. These things will be addressed if the university or whoever comes up with funding, and then we start to, so you can figure out what needs to happen with the different kinds of things that need to, like, we need to push more on the self-awareness, we need to push more on funds for fellowships or whatever it is, So I guess, but again, I don't know where those lists are or reports are, but hopefully they're somewhere. And it might just be, it's an afternoon's work, skimming through, figuring out, what's the same, the patterns that we can sort of as a starting place. But maybe that's where this document also came from. Yeah.
I was asking Aisha her thoughts. Are you first year or second year?
I am a second year, yes.
And do you have any thoughts?
I do, but I only have 2 classes in the department this semester, and both are with Dr. Bob, so it's not very representative of, the entire department or school. But I like the idea of just like pushing for action, because we do have like all these committees on committees on committees now, which is great. But if we could just make the focus of these committees to actually act upon things instead of focusing on the recommendations, because recommendations are great, but yeah, we talked about that. So
All right, so actually we already know what the situation, don't need to do any research, I guess. So we need an action plan. And I'm frozen.
An idea.
We can still hear you.
You're not, well, we can
okay.
hear you even though you're physically frozen.
Okay, so I think that's a great point. I think that's, what we're all saying. We know what should be done. We need to now do the action, like the applied research component. Like, hey, this is it. We know that alcohol is not good. So what do? We don't have to keep doing research that alcohol, too much alcohol, because alcohol is okay. Too much alcohol is not good. So what do you
For some people.
Right.
But I think you have to remember there's a reason why, I mean, I'm coming back to what Kim said, and he said he and Bob had been thinking about this. All bureaucrats will often ask you to produce a report. And the report is a proxy for delaying action or not taking any action or basically leaving it forever. So that's why, and in this university, we are far too used to people saying, you want to do something, show us the money, raise it. I mean, you know, how are we paying for rooms? How are we paying for your teaching? Whatever else. So it's a systemic kind of problem. We are talking about one kind of a systemic issue, but we are faced with another systemic issue, which kind of gets in the way of any kind of action happening. And the only way we can do it is, I don't think we should say that there's some things that is just self-awareness and some things that need resources. If they're serious, then everything needs resources. People's time, people's teaching, and everything needs a certain, if it's not money, then it's a certain kind of respect, and that's a different kind of resource, but it's there. So I think we have to ask for that. I mean, what will come on the table, just not the weight of a report, but something else also, you know?
Let me just say something about, you know, all the years I've been here and watched this. The biggest tension for me has always been that we
that came out, I don't know if it was the provost office a week or 2 or 3 ago, about the cohort effect in hiring, that if you can hire a cohort or sort of cluster hiring, I think they called it, you try to hire a number of people at once who are, you know, again, it feels weird to do that, but you are creating a larger, that there seem to be better outcomes in terms of retention and support when there's more than like we pick one and bring them on. But I guess I'm still wondering, and I don't know that we'll get an answer to this because I understand least of anybody the split between university level funding and the medical complex funding. You know, is there an expectation that downtown, which has a lot more money in some respects, will help to support this? Or are we talking medical complex and Mailman, which will have implications for what would be permanent sort of change versus granted change? And I don't know if we can ask that question, but I would be curious to know if the university level commitment to make a difference will trickle uptown when we have different financial models, or if we're talking about what do we have to push CYMC to do and Mailman, and so what are the then limitations of that, and are we willing to accept that or not? Oh,
Can I just, before you go there, because that's a rat hole that I don't want to go down, but I think somebody has to go down it, but somebody with some competency. Just two things on the reporting back. One is the, you know, the meta-analysis of what's happened before. I mean, Desiree did an incredible dissertation on rape reports from Columbia University. And as a master's essay topic, this could be a really useful report for a student to sort of dig into and report back as part of the finding of this committee. But another part of the finding, that just to play off Kavita's recommendation, is that yes, there's a problem with structural racism. There's also a problem structurally with dealing with structural racism in a serious way. And both of these things, I think, need to be recognized and sounded separately. Now back to funding.
No need to get back there.
I wanted to ask Aisha and Nidia. Am I pronouncing your name right? Nidia?
Yes,
Nidia. I just wanted to ask you, what do you think? Do you have any ideas about what other gaps we have in terms of courses or in terms of any of our priorities?
Well, Kavita, I'm not in classes. I'm a staff person.
Yeah.
So I'm not taking courses. This is all new to me, so I'm learning as I go, and I want to be able to, you know, recommend stuff. But right now, I'm just still kind of learning. And it's wonderful to be a part of such a great team right now. But yeah, but I don't have anything to say right now.
Nydia, you know you were selected for the committee, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I've just had a lot going on in the past week or
Right.
two.
I understand.
My mother, yeah.
But one thing that could be added then to the metrics that Kathy mentioned that would sort of monitor progress of this committee. I mean, you have advisory committees set up in various ways. Don't you want to hear from them whether anything has changed? And have some kind of tracking mechanism in place that would not just be events held or faculty hired or students supported, but does it feel different to be here? I mean, we do mixed methods research in this department. At least we could extend some of that to getting a sense of, is there a felt change in the wake of this effort?
Right.
Let me just say that what I know is that of all the 11 colleges that make up Columbia University, we are far and away the most diverse. There will be no trickle.
That's sad.
Huh?
I said, that's sad.
Well, yeah, it is, but that's why there will be no trickle, I believe, from downtown up here, because they will correctly point out that there are a lot of elements of this institution where there's nobody, and that they would be right in saying that we should focus on them instead of helping to make the rich get richer. And Yasmin, I agree. How sad is that we're the best that's out here? But if you look at who we are in terms of our faculty and students, I think you'll see that does constitute us as being something of winners in this game. And remember, every year that they put out diversity fellowships for junior faculty, we always get the lion's share. So they're going to point to us and say, y'all don't need nothing.
The dynamics of that selection too. First, it was just people of color, but then they added other criteria in order just to say, hey, yes, you're more diverse. Okay.
Let's be clear, that part of what that says, if we don't do it internally here, and I'm talking about Mailman, not necessarily SMS, we can't look to other sources to be how this is going to happen. And if we're in the midst of a budget crunch, let's just be clear that this is one of those real important existential dilemmas that institutions like ours face. And it's, are you simply talking a good game, or are you actually planning to commit to do something serious?
Right.
So I think the earlier we put that to the test, again, just so we don't waste our time, Kavita was so right. We will just make reports and words. Yeah,
Right.
you know, I've been there, done that, and I'm getting old. So, you know, if we can, you know, just sort of short circuit that and go straight to the end, I'd be happy. So would Hopper.
Hopper and Bob, could you write an op-ed about what you said with the history, the structural racism, and the structural problems with addressing structural racism in the university?
Give it a crack. I'm not nearly as old as Fuller, but I'd be happy to.
Could you write that and we can get it somewhere, and then it can become a clarion call for like all these universities who are talking a lot now and it's unclear, like say we, I'm sure there are no others, but attacking the two levels, because it's not
anonymously, of course.
What's that?
Huh?
We have 1 minute left. I said anonymous.
What is
why anonymously? Why anonymously?
So what is our ask finally?
Yeah, and where does it go? This should be part of the report. This is the committee's job. This is the committee's job. I'm happy to be retained as an expert consultant at a handsome consultation fee, but it's your job.
No, we're just facilitators.
Oh, right.
And I like that comment that you made, Bob. What's the statement that you made? We can leave with that, Kavita. Just a minute ago.
Which one? You know, I'm full.
That he's getting old.
Yeah. That's the one.
I'm getting old, so it's time. Do something. You mean the action without resources bit, or something else?
Something like that. Did you record?
Well, it's being recorded, so we can go back and try to capture. You know,
yeah.
I don't know which it was. Oh.
All right, so we all acted right now. and we get ready to leave the breakout.
I'm just going to make some comments and you should feel free to jump in if I've left anything out. Okay.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And we had a pretty rich conversation. So I wonder,
We just lost you, Patrick.
sorry, can you hear me?
just froze.
Now we can.
Yeah.
We lost your
sorry.
sound for a minute. That's okay.
Okay. Hopefully this
You're
phone.
good now.
Okay. I took notes. I was just saying so I can email them if that's going to be helpful. One of the things we talked about, well, I think we felt all of these pillars and domains were very important. So we just, I think, allowed ourselves to discuss each of them. And I think these themes fall, you know, some within specific categories and some are more cross-cutting. One thing we talked about was having a school level model for applying for minority supplements. Given that the number of grants that faculty have, we should have just a model for how this can happen and be institutionally supported as opposed to relying on individual faculty to do it. We thought that the development office really needs to have a mission or a mandate to identify sources of funding for students and faculty, that there should be funders out there who want to support our incoming MPH students, particularly those from disenfranchised groups or who come from difficult backgrounds. And Marita made the point that we collect a lot of this data in our applications, and we can identify if we aren't meeting targets or if we are actually not getting the number of minority students, largely due to cost, because that was one of the things that we talked about. With regard to our education and our curriculum, Marita noted that she's on both the department and school-wide committee and that the groups are really open. Jennifer and noted and others the challenges and the work involved in actually decolonizing a syllabus and looking for anti-racist work and truly embedding it, and made the point that I think a lot of us agree with, that that we weren't trained to do this, and we have to acknowledge that. And she actually noted another point that I fully agree with. If I can quote you, Jennifer, she feeling surveilled but not supported, so that we need to do this work, but there's a lack of actual support to do the work. And some of that also comes to money. It's about what we know, but it's also about the school's model, which is very clear to most of us. And that's, you know, that everything that we do has to have an account tied to it. So where's the account number to tie to decolonizing work? We talked about the idea of potentially doing affinity work in separate groups where white faculty, maybe white students, work individually on those difficult and uncomfortable conversations that need to occur, while people of color work on potentially a separate conversation, but that may be a useful approach. And just thinking about more about the recruitment and hiring process, how we bring in faculty and students, of course, but then also thinking about once faculty and students get here, what is the experience? So we can't just put all of our efforts in saying, let's get all these, you know, diverse students, get all these diverse hires, and then once they're here, still have essentially, as Danny put it, you know, putting them, you know, having them assimilate into a white space that really isn't supportive and not anti-racist. So how do we best manage and mitigate that? And I think that captures most of what we said. Again, I'll send the notes, and whoever else in my group wants to chime in if I didn't capture something.
That was a great summary, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Excellent, and lots of great points, really. Thank you. Group 4, I saw a chat that is, who is group 4? Do they think they know who they are? I saw something come in from Michelle that you were group 4.
That's our group. I'm sorry, I didn't know the number.
That's okay. Go ahead.
But we talked about a few things. Our conversation was very rich and focused on some of the pillars that were mentioned, but kind of veered away a little bit. We talked about just how important it would be to have an awareness of collaborative efforts that exist across departments. Our group was pretty doctoral student heavy, and we realized like we didn't know what other doctoral students were doing in terms of these issues or what other departments were doing. And that would be a great thing to know, and just maybe receive communication about like what other departments are doing or whether there are efforts that exist across departments. And another thing that was brought up is making sure that there's like an active and iterative thought process when it comes to inclusion. Some of us described how there's a tendency to ignore certain groups and just being mindful of groups that aren't being represented in efforts to include. And one thing we brought up was the absence of IMSD this year. I was in IMSD for every year up until this year, and I benefited greatly from that program. Hi, Gina. And I think we all described how there's a need for something similar to make sure that diversity is not only prioritized, but also adequately funded. And we also described the importance of recognizing the labor of the Diversity Council. I think a lot of times efforts to kind of change department practices or I don't know, bring in new ideas fall on the shoulders of people who've kind of been harmed by existing systems. And it's important to recognize just the labor and effort that it takes to do this work. And so just acknowledging that, being grateful for that. Yeah, and those were the primary points that were brought up in our discussion.
Excellent, Howie. Claps and shaking of heads. I feel the same way. So thank you for the summary, and we'll come back to those points for sure. Group 3, who's 3? Does 3 know who you are? I'll look it up.
Group 3, we consisted of Mani, Bob, Yasmin, Kim, Aisha, Nidia. We were all equal participants in this discussion, and I'm merely a voice communicating what we discussed. So we had actually a discussion which was both, I think, hopeful and somewhat skeptical. So I'll start with the hopeful parts of it first, when Yasmin in particular was talking about how this is a really special moment in some ways, and maybe there is a recognition that some kinds of change can really happen. There's a different kind of energy. And there's potential for maybe following certain priority actions through certain kinds of, certain kinds of pillars and pathways that we've identified. But almost very soon after that, most of us moved into thinking from action to accountability. The notion really that we have a long history in the school, and both Bob and Kim spoke about this, of coming up with a range of reports and recommendations. And more often than not, we don't have resources. This becomes this exercise of making faculty think again and again. And in fact, there was even a discussion that Mani was suggesting, should we just go into the history of how many reports have been produced, where we've all said a lot of things, and maybe it might be a good idea to mine them and to see what actually happened in a matrix from those. So is this a different moment? Is this a different, can an understanding of systemic racism, how does it meet a system within Columbia, which is itself rooted in, as Patrick's group pointed out, in deep-seated, in soft money, in the notion that unless we pull up the money and there's money on the table and resources, there's no way in which all of these ideas are going to get translated. So we decided we would point out that there was a need to remember the past, but we don't need to necessarily recover it. The other point that we also made was that Mani suggested that maybe if we could think about resources not only here, but there are potentially perhaps resources that are cross-cutting, and that may be things that we could access beyond the school itself in other places. But on the other hand, we are also seen amongst this whole group in the university as being far more diverse than many of the other departments and schools in other parts of the university. So we start from a position of, we see ourselves as needing so much work that needs to be done, but there are other places that are far more, far more marginal than we are. We also thought that we made the point that it was not only resources, but we also thought that there's a need to rethink the system of soft money itself. We can't just be thinking that we need to hire a lot of underrepresented minority faculty. And the moment this moment of passion and politics goes away, what's going to happen to mentor them? What's going to happen? This is not just an opportunity. Bob used the word grant plantation. This is not just a time for all of us to be looking to be using the labor of faculty, students, and others to say we need underrepresented minorities, just simply to be using them, hiring them, getting students on fellowships. And like Patrick pointed out, not to have these spaces that are open. And we also thought the other point was that a matrix itself, what kind of progress are we monitoring through a matrix? Are we actually saying that we've had a range of events, or are we actually saying that this is a very different space and place to be in? And how do you measure that? There's a different kind of measurement for that versus the number of events and other things that we tick off. So these are some of the points. And one of the points that Marnie raised was maybe one way to look at it is to do cluster hiring so that faculty support each other. But very much, I think we were really talking about the limitations of this funding model itself. We also pointed to the terrific work that Desiree had done. We were thinking about how there's a notion, this mismatch between understanding the structural racism, but the structural issues in the university itself. So these are really some of the issues. And at the end of it, Bob said, he's getting very old. He said he's seen a lot of history of all of this happen. And there is really no delivery of a lot of these things that we've talked about. So how many more times are we going to thrash this through? And what are the resources for this? And what's the thinking going forward? I don't know if I've summarized this well enough, but I'm happy for everyone to chip in. Thanks.
Thank you, Kavita, and the group for sure. I think that we will return always, I think, to the resource issue and the need to change things at multiple levels above us as well as within us. So thank you. We have two more groups and it's 10 till. So let me get to group 2. Who's group 2? You know who you are by chance? That's the Merlin Mayella group.
Okay, so our group also talked a lot about resources, as all the other groups have. We were talking about having courses on, research in hard to reach populations and how to get the community involved and all of that. And then kind of came to this well, it's a bigger issue of what we can have a list of courses, but we don't have the resources to actually do the work currently. We also talked about how, one of the goals of this ideally would be to figure out how SMS can model what it looks like to, put these sorts of things into the curriculum, across all courses and things like that. We also talked about, Dr. Diacon mentioned doing this work through a trauma-informed lens, that these conversations and these sorts of things are not happening in a vacuum, and they very much have an impact on the faculty, staff, and students in the department. We also talked about, as Gina mentioned, communication channels and what are the best ways for faculty, staff, and students, as well as these committees to communicate information within the department and, between the school as a whole. So I think that was just a quick summary of what we talked about. If anyone else from my group wants to add anything, please do so.
Thanks, Mayla. It sounds like you summarized the key points. I did hear some parts of that group, so thank you for that. And then group 1 by, let me see, can you figure out who you are? That's Rachel, Desiree, Tara, that your group?
I don't think we have a spokesperson, but I'm happy to start
Okay.
and represent. So I think our conversation mirrored a lot of Kavita's group's discussion, in that, you know, SMS is not a microcosm, and all four of those pillars are very intimately tied to the structure of the school. And so before we move forward, it almost feels like we need to upfront know what the resources and accountability will be, so that it's not a waste of people's time or effort. So I think knowing up front at the school level or the university level before moving fully forward would be helpful. There was also the discussion of the archival records. I think we went back to the 80s with Peter's committee. There's a file, a typewriter file out there floating around that they've searched for. David has also a committee from the 90s that he led. So we also had that discussion of, like, these reports are out there. Can we find them before we start necessarily from scratch? We also had some more practical discussions about what priorities might look like. There was a lot of discussion about curriculum and how that could actually be something that faculty moves forward. I love Jennifer's point that there needs to be support and resources around that. But making success in that might require some institutionalization of that, so it doesn't just fall on faculty, and that there is efforts, either, I think it was Desiree who suggested maybe at the accreditation level, at the New York State level, maybe with our curriculum committee. I know with Marita, I think being really accountable about that and having diversity of guest speakers, you know, scholars that we represent in our syllabus could be an important first step that we could start soon. And then I think our last discussion was also about communication and some frustration around the best way to really communicate what everyone's doing. I think there's lots of us who are involved in these efforts, not just within the department, but, you know, outside the school. And there's not a good way. I mean, SMS Weekly is wonderful, but it doesn't capture, you know, it really focuses on grants and publications. There's not a good way to spotlight all the amazing stuff that people are doing. So is there another way, whether we do like a monthly spotlight on what people are doing around equity and anti-racism, where we could communicate and highlight some of that work and acknowledge it? I think that those are the main points. I might have missed a few things, but thank you.
Thanks, Rachel, and group one. So, let me just try to, I think there certainly are, I'm trying to quickly do a theme analysis and identify a couple of things that we could put. Let me just ask, I should ask the rest of you before I try to make a quick summary. Are there other points that people really want to, you know, other than the group representation, the representatives that spoke, but when anybody feels, you know, that we really feel, I want to give a chance for if there's something really that was missed or that people feel especially strongly about. Just want to give that opportunity. Okay. All right. So I think, let me just quickly, as I was, and quickly meaning like it's not necessarily full analysis, but I think the three strongest things I heard in common are that we've tried to do versions of this before, and there's a value in looking at what those reports and suggestions were. And we don't just want to do another report and do nothing, but we could potentially look at those and may not see many differences. We could look at them, but what I was hearing from that is to guide like what we do forward. The other, I mean, there were, so I'm just hitting themes first. So one is a communication theme, which I've heard in lots of different levels that range from like just highlighting, and like the last example, highlighting and profiling what we already do, to having an understanding of what the school is planning and how does that fit within the university, which we know it is a totally different other level of thinking about how we're informed about what's going on. And probably the one that helps us figure out what to do on Monday is where are the resources and what are the resources. So I mean, tell me if you think I missed a key theme, but I think some of those were the three things that cut across: communication, resources, and learning from the past, but not just repeating it to an endpoint that doesn't get us to a different place. Is that fair to say? Those, I heard the kind of three biggest things.
Yeah, can I just add one little caveat, not caveat, but a little addition, because I think Peter and I were kind of went off the wall about a bunch of things because of our frustration with the process. And it really does seem like everyone in all the groups are addressing our frustrations, which was, you know, in part, historically, we've gone through this process, and without the resources, without the support, we got nowhere. But the one other point that I threw in at the end that probably isn't really addressed was whether or not we're doing this in order to make ourselves feel better, okay? In other words, to introduce materials into the curriculum, to introduce ideas about diversity into our thinking, to do better studies of other people, or are we really trying to restructure the school? Are we trying to really diversify the school? Because that's where the money comes in. You know, if we're really serious about this, then we have to think about, you know, what does structural racism really mean? Okay, when it comes to a private university with limited resources. This began with Rachel's first comment, I think, which was, where do we fit into the larger goals of this university? Where is the support for this within the university, other than wonderful, well-meaning people who say wonderful, well-meaning things? But are we really aiming at creating a curriculum that makes us feel like we're addressing the problem, or are we trying to really transform the school? Does that make some sense, anyone? To transform the faculty, transform the student body, to make sure that they're, you know, the issues of the structural realities of what Kavita called, what was it, grand colonialism? I'm not quite sure what the term was, but it was a great term that I've got to try to remember.
Decolonization, are you talking about?
Something, yeah, well, you know, the idea of, you know, are we really intent on making sure this is a diverse school, and a school that really reflects the world around us, or are we trying to find new grant sources to make sure that we can continue our studies of other people, you know, in the most colonial sense of the word? And that's what worries me. And that's, you know, it's not easy to address, but, you know, I think we have to really think about that a bit.
Yeah, thanks, David. I know, and lots of people are signing off, so thank you to everybody who's signing off, and I know we should wrap, but I think that, I think what I mean, I certainly will take all this in. This is, our committee will be meeting soon. We're working on the dates right now. I think what's running through my mind is, you know, it's really a do both. If we change a lot of things within SMS, we become the, I know I heard in Merlin and Ray's group, like there are some guidelines developing related to equity for curriculum, and that maybe we can be when those are available to us, which should be soon, we could potentially be the role models in doing that, right? Like, what can we actually do within SMS that can be part of a part of collective change, but that's not going to have any long-lasting effect if the broader school and university issues don't change. And so I think it's a both, and I don't mean that lightly, because we know that we can't do one with, we can hopefully be a key part of change, but we can't make change last on our own, which, you know, is why we all look from a social structural perspective to begin with. You know, I mean, I'm sure you can imagine, I hope you can imagine how I'm thinking, like, you know, there's so many layers of this. The school will say, well, there's the medical center, and the medical center will say, this is how the university treats us, and the university will say, blah, blah, blah. So we know that's the sequence that happens. But what I want to think about, and we'll certainly take to the committee for our first discussion, unless you feel this is an incorrect way to go, I do feel like if we can get started doing a few things, you know, that we feel like we're doing something, which is why one of my questions of, like, what would we do next week if we could start, without ignoring all the broader things. And I do think, and this is where communication comes in a little bit. I mean, I'll just be honest, you all know, I hope you know I'm pretty transparent. There's no way that I know what other departments are doing unless I write to their chairs directly. How communication works here. It's no one's fault, but it's something that should change. So I mean, I'm not saying I'm not willing to find out what other departments are doing, and we have weekly meetings where we talk about all kinds of things from the school, but it doesn't necessarily translate into me hearing what's going on, how can we work together, how do we make the doctoral student experience, that's a topic we've talked about, how do we make the doctoral student a more collective school experience? It's not that these issues are not brought up, but that there's room for much improvement in communication on multiple levels is what I'm trying to say, I think. And I'm not trying to pass it on to someone else. I'm just expressing my own frustration with feeling like, how do I even find out what people are doing? What kind of diversity committees have they created? I don't actually know that. Like, those are discussions I'm happy to initiate with co-chairs, and this is why this is so helpful to me. The more that I can hear what you would like to do, what we would like to do, what I need to learn, what norm changes I can potentially make. And I really mean that, like, communication is a norm as well as an activity. And I think some of that is the structures of the discipline in the school and the university that we're in. I could say that openly as well, which is that we're a highly independent group, but that puts on a whole bunch of other pressures. Right. So I think, I definitely hear the messages that you're saying. I would like to approach, Ray, do you want to, Ray just wrote me something we'll talk about a little bit later. And so I think that, that there are things that I do feel like there are things we should prioritize as a department, but there doesn't make sense in doing that unless we can see how that fits into the big picture. I think, some of the summarizing comments about the issues of resources and the level of change that's required, is something that we need to have our voices be heard, obviously. And that those are attempts, we can work towards that change. Probably can't do that on our own, but I think that we can do that with the help of others. And I think one way to get started in that is, what do we want to do in SMS so that we're making some steps? And what we're doing in SMS might be saying, these are the areas where we want to share across departments. These are the priority arguments to the school for resources, because most of what we want to do does take resources. But I think there are things, this is often just the way that I approach coping, which is my expertise, which is you do things that you can achieve to feel like you're starting to make progress. And I think we can do that within our own department, and as well as having that inform how in the way that we try to make change at the school level. Where they're interchangeable is, where do the resources come from? So I know I'm certainly not naive to that, and want to think about how to address some of those things. So I will say we really are just starting this committee. We haven't had our first meeting. There are some things going on at the school level that maybe Ray and I and Bob can talk more about, for how to get some of that communication from what's happening in forward to what's happening in the dean's offices about how to address some of these issues, so that we can at least feel better informed. I heard that from a few people, because I think that can also help us think about the way that we might want to go forward ourselves. So thanks everyone for being honest. I hope you found yourself in a comfortable spot in your breakout rooms. If there are notes or things you want to write to me, but my next step will be to meet with this committee, hopefully within a week or two. And part of that will be confirming how we keep everyone updated. And as I said, it's more like a steering group. And then from there, hopefully there will be groupings of activities of what we can actually, what steps we can actually take, not just talk about. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. Good to see you. Sorry we're not in person. I feel like I say that every time I miss you. Bye.